Well, we're going to get started. I want to welcome those of you who have logged in tonight, and thank you for joining the Waypoint 55 webinar, which is a training webinar that we do every month at Waypoint, trying to equip lay leaders in the church specifically, although often that might be staff or other people as well, but trying to do training for leaders in the church to equip them whatever area that they may be serving in, because there just seems to be not a whole lot of resourcing out there for individual church leaders. And so our topics each year will run the spectrum of training for prayer team leaders, ministry or missions teams leaders, first impressions, safety and security, and a couple of our topics every year relate specifically to elders. And so that's the topic that we have tonight, specifically about elder retreats and how to have quality, effective elder retreats. And say, first of all, as we do every month, I want to thank Mid-Atlantic Christian University, who has been the sponsor of our webinar platform since the very beginning, the first month that we did this, coming up on 5 years ago. And we serve in a similar area with a similar passion for the church, and so we're thankful for them as they sponsor our webinar platform and help us do this. I do want to tell you that if you are interested in other of the webinars that we have been able to do over the past several years, we have them on a YouTube channel. And so each of the webinars get posted after the fact, 2-3 days afterwards, and they are put into playlists. And so depending on which area of ministry you're looking for, that topic will go into that playlist, and you click on that playlist and see any of those. And so if you would like to see any of the other elder training that we've done in particular, with guests, that you can click on that playlist and see those as well. So we want to invite you to do that. Would love to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and even hit the little bell that you see over there. And when you do that, you get notified when the next webinar gets uploaded to our YouTube channel. And so we'd love for you to join us. Also would love for you to kind of forward the links to those to people in your church that serve in those particular areas. If you see that a particular webinar would be useful to one of your team leaders, like ministry teams, missions team, that is, or your first impressions team leader, or things like that, you could do us a favor by forwarding that, let them know, and then having them subscribe as well. And so during COVID, and everybody's jumped onto YouTube and Facebook and all those things, our subscriptions to our YouTube channel, I think, have tripled in the last couple of years. And so it's been really useful to be able to use this tool to equip the church. And so what we're talking about this evening is how to have good, effective elder retreats as a way to really move your elders forward. And so I've got some suggestions, some points that I want to make tonight here that will be in a PDF that will be included in the attachment that you'll get tomorrow as a follow-up to this webinar. And so if you're taking notes, that would be great. But hopefully you get the principles of how to use a retreat as a ministry tool. And so we're going to dive right into that. I do want to let you know there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which is different from the chat button. The chat button, everybody can see that, and you can kind of chime in, but the Q&A button will give me a question in a different queue over on the side of my screen, and that I'll try and answer either kind of as it comes in, or I'll be able to hold it until the end and try to answer a Q&A question at the end. And so but the trick is as soon as you think of the question, go ahead and type it in so it's sitting there so I can see it, and so that you don't forget it and aren't ready, and so we aren't ready for it at the end of the webinar. So I invite you to go ahead and hit that Q&A button whenever you think of something that you'd like to ask, and we'll see if we can't answer all the questions this evening. And so I'm going to go ahead and get back to this shared screen and just go through about 6 or 7 ideas that'll help us have great elder retreats. And the first one, I renamed my slide, but my first one used to say just have them. The first trick is to have an elder retreat. And I'm surprised as I get to work with churches and I ask them, hey, do you have an elder retreat? Often they will say, yeah, well, we used to, but. And whether they had it or not, or they've never had it, it doesn't seem like too many people are actively having elder retreats currently. differently. And I think it's an effective tool to have. But the trick is, I think, is they go for a season or two where they find it difficult to schedule one because of everybody's busy schedules, and then they get out of the rhythm of having it. And so I would suggest to have an effective elder retreat, you've got to lock it in on your ministry calendar, that it is part of your church rhythm. And so I would pick a date that works well for you. I would suggest spring or fall. I like early October for some reason. The weather's kind of nice at that point. The summer season is over as far as summer places that you might pick as far as some kind of a facility that you would use. So pick it on your calendar, and it is that weekend every year. And because if you try to figure out, look on everybody's calendar of all your elders and whichever staff that you might invite and others, you will never find the perfect date for everyone to join. And they'll always be, well, this is with that. And also, I would include that date on the expectations when you invite new people to join your elder team, is that they just realize that the expectation is the first weekend of October every year. That is a big deal. That is our elder retreat, or whatever you would host. It could be late summer, right before school gets starts and most vacations are over, but school hasn't started. It could be spring in that odd season between Easter and when school lets out. So late April, early May could be a slot. Could be wintertime, early February. Our board of directors retreat for Waypoint just had our retreat last weekend in mid-February, and so that works out well for us because the new year has just gotten into a new rhythm. But whatever it is, I would say to pick it, lock it in, make it an expectation that everyone comes, and try to get everyone there. I would also recommend when you lock it in on your calendar that you would consider making it through a Sunday, not just a Saturday, that a Friday night, Saturday morning, that a lot of churches that I've seen will have elder retreats, doesn't seem to be quite long enough to get as much done as I feel like you need to try and get done. We're going to talk about some things that you can include on the agenda for your elder retreat. And if you do it just Friday night, Saturday morning, I think that's basically like 2 meetings, of a normal month. And I think you can use this. And so I would try and schedule it Friday night through Sunday lunch if you could. And the scary part, but the good part, is that your elders are all leaders of the church. Your preacher is probably going to be there, and so you're going to have to make arrangements, if you would consider doing that, for people to cover all that while your elders are gone. And I think that's a good thing, to have other people stepping up for your leaders and everyone to see that the church is going to survive even when some people are gone. Of course, during COVID for the last year, we've discovered we can do church even though some key people are not with us. Seems like every week some person or family can't make it because they've either gotten COVID or been exposed to someone who has. Even here in the last few weeks, couple of months with the Omicron variant, we're having to make adjustments all the time. So we've learned that we can make it a weekend without some of our leaders being there. And so I think you can get a whole lot more done if you would schedule it over an entire weekend and not just the Friday night, Saturday morning schedule. And if at least you could go to late in the Saturday evening through supper and past in supper, to where you get a whole day and a half and not just kind of parts of 2 days. And so that's the first thing I'd say is block it out on your calendar, make it part of your rhythm, make everybody know, start talking about it early enough to where everybody blocks it out, even though it's on your calendar. If they don't block it off on their calendar, they're going to schedule something. And then, 2 weeks before, oh, I double booked or whatever. And so if it's in October, for example, in January, you need to start talking about, hey, don't forget our elders retreat is in the first weekend of October, like it is every year. And people are blocking that out. So if you're gone on a Sunday, I would recommend that you make a big deal about it on stage. Whoever does stay, run the stage that weekend, that they would say, our elders are on a retreat this weekend and they are praying and planning, and we're going to pray for them right now in the service. And I think the people at your church get a lot of a comfort and confidence to know that their leaders are really being proactive about the leadership of your church. And so don't miss the opportunity to share that from stage, that that's where your elders are, that you could be praying for them. So that's my first point that I would say tonight is about effective elder retreats, is to have them. Make sure you have them, and I'm surprised at how few churches are having elder retreats currently like they used to. All right, the next one, I would say, the next point is another very simple one before we get into the weeds, and that is to get away. So that's what a retreat is for, is to get away. And I can tell you from experience personally, and talking with many churches. Waypoint, we have the luxury of interfacing with a lot of churches. We've got more than 500 churches in the Waypoint region that we have the opportunity to serve and engage with. And we talk a lot about elders. Actually, in the past couple of weeks, I've had the good fortune of working with 5 churches, 5 elderships at churches in the past couple of weeks, doing some equipping and training. And so I get to ask them a lot of questions. And if you don't get away, if you have a retreat, I can guarantee you, if you start having a retreat, the second or third year, someone's going to raise their hand at the end of the retreat and say, why don't we do this at the church building next year? Just meet at the church building on Friday night, sleep in our own beds, come back Saturday morning. And I guess that's a good idea. And I'm a pretty frugal person. And so the idea of saving the money that you might have for that sounds pretty good. But what happens is that you're a couple years away from not having an elders retreat when you do that it just degrades the experience so much. And typically it just feels like an extended elders meeting. And who wants a longer elders meeting? I mean, if to do 2 or 3 nights on 2 or 3 hours on Friday nights, one thing, and then to come back on Saturday and do a couple more of that, that's not what we're talking about for an elder retreat. It's just a really long elders meeting. And so retreat is to get away. And so what does that look like to get away? And for me, I think there's a sweet spot of how far you can go, and that would be a couple of hours drive. So for wherever your church is right now, you know the map around your church about what would be something that's about 2 hours away. And 2 hours for me, it's not anything magical about that, but it's far enough away that I feel like I've gotten out of town. And if you're an hour away, someone's going to say, well, I'll get there, I'm going to leave late, work late, and I'll catch up with you guys, or things like that. Is I've got to feel like I'm far enough away that I can focus on what we're doing at the retreat and not be still mentally present back at home. And so that might be a different distance for you. And maybe there's it's crossing a river or going over a mountain, or I don't know what it is. But how far away do you need to get to where you feel like you and your whole team are away and can focus on the task at hand? And so you can decide that. Another way to get away, and this kind of gets in fights with us a little bit, but I have been on elder retreats where we basically went to elder training events and use that as an elder retreat. And so like, for example, just in the last week, there was the Next Level conference with Compassion Christian down at Savannah, and whole elderships would go. And I think that's a great idea, particularly if you can be proactive in the van time down and the van ride back, to use that as part of the agenda, and not just driving, but use that to deal with some of the things that you would if you were in a retreat itself, because you're going to have a 3, 4, 5 hour drive each direction. And so that can be an alternative. I don't think it's the same as a retreat, but it's at least a hybrid of where you're getting out of town, getting to talk, looking at things differently. And so that you could consider that. All right, let me go back to here. And so when you start talking about what should we do at our elders retreat, for me, I think one format that you could consider would be that you would have segments kind of in thirds that focus on the past, the present, and the future. And here's what I mean by that. Past, present, and future is I think you can set aside a time early on and say, let's talk about all the wins for the last year. And I recommend getting a big Post-it board, and say, what were the wins from 2021? And even though we were in the middle of a COVID year and it seems like it was way more frustrating than anything else, there had to be some wins, that this family they're a win, or this new staff person, that's a win. And you write those down. And after an hour, you just start celebrating all that God's done through your church over the last 12 months. If you think about in Scripture, the Old Testament, there were so many times that the people of God would look back and remember all that God had done. They would even set up rocks next to the river to remind them of that, what God had done there. And so there was memory tools. And so our big Post-it notes could be those memory tools. And then when you're done, take a picture of that Post-it note, because no one wants to keep it for a whole year. And so you can wad it up and throw away, but you got a picture every year of here's all the things that God has done. And so that's the past, is kind of celebrating what God has done through your church since your last retreat. And that's a sense of praising God for what he's done, even in spite of some challenging time. And then in the present, you're going to take an honest picture of where we are today. And honest is the part. You can say, oh, everything's great. But part of the objective of a retreat, I think, is for realignment, or to retune where you're at. And if people know me very well, they know that part of my story is for 25 years, I've had this muscle car. It's a 1970 Ford Torino GT convertible, and I wasn't a car guy before I got this car. My dad never let me help him work on the car, so I had to learn as I go. And so I've learned a lot about cars, but I had to learn how to tune an old engine. It's got a 302 V8 engine in it. I had to learn how to tune that. And the interesting thing about old cars, new cars, the engines are a whole lot different. You just change the spark plugs every 75,000 miles. But in old cars in particular, they run themselves out of tune. And the interesting thing about cars is engines never run themselves into tune. They never get better into tune as they work and run. Is that over time they just slowly, unnoticeably, from one day to the next, do they run themselves out of tune? But over a year's time, or whatever it is, they run themselves out of tune. And so there's a time every year that you need to tune your engine, that you just realize, okay, it's got a little bit off kilter, a little bit off dead center. And so we're going to make some little adjustments to get us back, and so that we're running efficiently and effectively. Well, the same would be true about alignment in your car. There's two ways alignment happens. Sometimes it's very unnoticeable. But after a year or so, you realize, man, our car is just pulling to the right or pulling to the left a little bit. It'll still go straight, but man, we got to work harder than ever before for it to go straight. Or you hit some monster pothole, after the winter's over, and just that event can knock your car out of alignment. And so you can take your car to the mechanic and have an alignment done where you get it back to where it runs not only directionally in the right direction, but with ease, because it's not pulling all the time. And that's really the intent of an elders retreat, is to realize, elderships never run themselves into tune. They never tune themselves, because you're working week to week in the church, and there's all these factors, external factors, that each of you have family lives and work responsibilities, and then the church on top of that. And so the elderships just never become focused over time. It's you lose your focus, or you start pulling to the left just a little bit. You're still moving in the right direction, but it's not as easy as it used to be. And so the intent of an elders retreat is to realign. And that's a very positive thing for every eldership to do. So to realign on the basics of what are we trying to pull off? What's our mission statement? What's our objectives? What are our values? Are they still the values? These were our values 5 years ago, not just our general values, but our stated values. We're going to be about these 5 things at our church. Are they still legit? And so you can ask those kind of questions. Of course, you can ask those in a regular elders meeting, but usually you've got an agenda that doesn't allow you the time to take a step back and look at where you're at before you can make an adjustments to be better in tune or better aligned. And so that's really the goal for a good elder retreat, is to be realigned together. And so that's a look at the present. Where are we? Let's be honest. Where are we getting pulled to the left? Where are we getting pulled to the right? What is just not what's missing, like a cylinder missing, an 8-cylinder engine. You can still drive when one of the 8 cylinders is missing, and you're really firing on 7. But man, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. It chugs along, and the more stress you get under going uphill or pulling something with a trailer, you notice more that you're not in tune. And the same is true for elders, that you can run along with things not being quite right, but when you get under stress, either going up a hill or you're dragging something, some kind of season in ministry or something really puts the church under stress or the elders under stress, that's when you notice how out of tune you are. And so using an annual rhythm to stay in tune is really important. So there's past, celebrating the past; presence, being honest about where we are, what's running, what's the 7 cylinders working well, and what's the 1 cylinder or 2 that is missing right now and is making us sputter along a little bit. And then there needs to be a session, of course, about talking about the future, where we headed. And it could be for the next 12 months, could be for the next 3 years. There are groups that help you do this, and I think they can be useful. Personally, I'm not big into the big 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. And some groups are, and they're great at it. But I think 1, 2, 3 years is about as far out in this world, in this season, that we can think of, because things change so quickly. And to me, it feels a little presumptuous to think, well, 10 years from now, this is what we hope to do. And there's some tools that allow you to make some general things that, if our values are true, then 10 years from now, this is what we're hoping to see. But I would really focus on, boy, for the next year, for the next 2 years, we're going to be aligned as a church, aligned as a leadership on these things. And then you come back a year later and see how your alignment is, or how in tune you are with that vision. And then if you tune up every year, you're going to get there in 10 years regardless. So past, present, and future is a really simple kind of agenda for how you would split up your weekend together at a retreat. All right. So let me go back here. Another thing that I would say for your elder retreats is that you would include a really strong prayer focus on your agenda. And by strong, I mean block it out in time, and don't just make it the end of each meeting, but that there will be a prayer focus. If you remember in Scripture, there's this passage of scripture in the book of Acts, chapter 6, where it's really the first depiction of how the church operated. The church was established in Acts chapter 2 with Pentecost, and then we see Peter in Acts chapter 3 and 4, but then the elders. It's what we think of the chapter where deacons are installed. But I think the deacons installed, it was just the solution to the problem, but it's really a picture of how church leadership operated. And I believe that's why Acts chapter 6 verses 1 through 7 are in Scripture, is not to teach us how to select deacons, but to teach us how leadership works in the church. It's the very first picture we see of the church in action, is a depiction on how they made decisions. And I think that's really important. But if you remember, the widows that were not the Jewish widows, but the Greek widows in their church, were not being treated as well as the Jewish widows. And they complained about that. And so they brought that to the leaders, and the leaders said, okay, we got to fix this. The one thing they didn't do is fix it. They delegated it, which that's the picture of the church leadership in action, is the elders stayed in their lane and they delegated it to godly people, to deacons, Stephen and the rest. And as a result, the church grew. The next verse 7 says, so as a result of the way they made a decision to delegate to godly people, the result of that decision-making process was the growth of the church, when elders led well. But do you remember what they said? We're going to delegate this away. Why? And I don't know if you remember this story, but they said, because we've got to dedicate ourselves to prayer and ministry of the word. That we're not going to steal this job from other people in the church that could do it. We're going to delegate it to them so that we can stay in our lane. And the first thing that they said they got to stay dedicated to is prayer and the word. But prayer, your elder retreat is a perfect opportunity to really dedicate some time to prayer, corporate prayer as a team, individual prayer, creative prayer. You could say, hey, we could have a concert of prayer, if you know what that's like. That was really popular 10, 20 years ago. Or be led in other kind of prayer activities that you might not have in your normal elders meeting. And so I would put on the agenda, where are you going to put that in there to have a really meaningful, where we're getting on our knees, literally, not figuratively, and praying for our church, praying for uh, the lost people around our church that we're going to be trying to reach in the next year, and praying for all these things, praying for workers because the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So beseech the Lord of the harvest to send workers. There's all these things that you can be praying for, and that needs to be a big element of your elder retreat. And so you can invite someone on your team that's they're the prayer champion. I mean, we all should be prayers, but then there's people that's their giftedness for intercession, and you can invite them to kind of own that element of the retreat, is to be your prayer agenda person for your retreat. And so you can also be praying by name for people. That's something that I used to love to do with my elders. Is I would have our admin person print out all the people who were newly regular attenders at our church, and we would try to remember who they are, and we would pray for them, and pray for them that they would come to faith through our church, or pray for them that they would get involved and become members of our church. And so we've got records now with databases that we didn't used to have, that you could physically pray for your sheep, that shepherds would be praying for their sheep. And so that's the next element, is to include a really strong prayer agenda in your elder meeting. All right. This kind of refers to either of the last two segments that I talked about, but you can consider bringing in an outside speaker or facilitator for your retreat. And this helps in a variety of ways. For example, they could be doing some of that future thinking that they could facilitate, and they're kind of trained in facilitating how do we dream and plan for the future, to create a strategic plan or a strategic vision for our church, a vision frame. And there are people that are better skilled at that because they've been trained at that. They can lead it effectively and efficiently so that you stay on task and do that. Or they could be really equipping. They could be really helping with that whole prayer focus and prayer emphasis, or they could keep things on task, and their objectivity could help with that, or they could help keep the conversation moving along on task as you've laid out the agenda. And so I don't think you have to do this. Most elderships certainly can do this all on their own, but you might consider doing that and see if that could be useful to you, and develop a relationship with that person that you could draw on their wisdom and their advice in the future, because they've been there with you on a retreat, and they see your culture, they see your heart, they see your values, and they could speak into your leadership as a team next year, even without them coming. But they're always there available to say, I saw you guys do this, but you might want to consider this. And so that could be really helpful. All right, I'm going to share the screen again here, but remember, if you've got any questions about any of these, about what that might look like, go ahead and hit the Q&A button and ask a question. We'll try to get that either now or here at the end in a few minutes. All right, the next one, this almost seems to go without saying, but I don't think it does, and that is to include training in talking about elder training, and in your agenda, you've got a special amount of time that you can do something more than you would do in a regular elders meeting. Most elders meetings are not a whole lot of training. We do have a webinar that I did a year ago about effective elder meetings and 7 elements that you should have in an effective elder meeting. And I included in there training, but you can only dedicate 15, 20 minutes, although I think you should every time, on elder training. But here you could block out a whole time to train it what it means to be an elder. And the reason for that is because I don't think hardly any of us were ever trained. This is how you be an elder. You just get elected. They say, will you do it? You go, well, I don't know what it means exactly. And they're like, come on, you can do it. That you're not mentored and trained. And there's not a whole lot of resources out there to help us understand what it looks like to be a good elder. And so I think this should be a primary objective of every elder retreat, is to have initial and ongoing training for elders, what it means to be a good elder. And there is thankfully some good resourcing out there now with the E2 Elder Guys in particular. They have so many resources out there that they've generated in the last 10 years or so. Christian Church Guys, Dr. Gary Johnson and David Roadcup and Jim Estep. And we've used them many times for these webinars, for the training webinars, as well as their own resourcing. It's great stuff, but there's other great stuff out there as well. One thing I think you should be trained in also is not just on how to be an elder, but there's a surprising little amount of information in Scripture about how to be an elder. There's a whole lot on what an elder is like as far as who he is spiritually, but not functionally on how elders act. If you distill all the scriptures down that about what elders do, it's about one page. If you would cut and paste them all onto one sheet of paper. And so there's not a lot there, but there's a lot of principles that you can use on this is how we can be good elders. There's some good leadership principles that you can learn, like from the book of Nehemiah, for example, great leadership principles you can learn from there. The other training that I would do, though, is I would do some theological training. And because number one, because most elders need it more, but for me, it's coming from the back end, is thinking about what are some of the theological areas that the people in our church, our flock, assume our shepherds have some level of knowledge and understanding and even expertise about, because probably most of us aren't as well versed in those areas as our church members would hope or would assume that we have. And so I think it's a good opportunity to take a section of each elder retreat and just to teach and learn or relearn some theology that's current and relevant to the church today. And so, for example, I was at a church just this weekend where the preacher is going through the book of Romans, and he was teaching some theology, particularly about the first century church's teaching on homosexuality and how and why the Bible teaches that now, and how people will respond to those scriptures and how they'll question those scriptures. And it was really, it's 30 minutes of really great teaching on how that whole conversation has really been challenged in the last 10, 15 years. And I thought this would be great for every eldership to have this conversation, to just kind of sit down and say, okay, let's lay the cards on the table. Where are we at on this as a church and as a culture? How are we going to be able to give a reason for the hope that we have, that this is not where it's at, but it's with God's design for mankind. And so you could pick the topics, and they're pretty easy to have out there. You could ask in this elders retreat, so what do we need to talk about next year? And I think there's plenty of guys that are going to say, you know what, I don't think I have a good enough handle on this particular area when I'm asked by people at the church. And so, and this is one of those areas where you could invite someone to come be your guest speaker. If there isn't someone at your church that feels that I can tell you that there are people who know theology that would love to be invited to come to an elder retreat and talk about that, because they have so few opportunities when they geek out about theology to come and share what they know with people. And so if you invite them to come and talk about any of these current topics that are challenging the biblical theology that we've held to for years and years, centuries, then there's someone that's going to love it to come and talk to you about that in a really good way. And so that's part of the training that I would recommend is theological training. What are the areas that we need to be better equipped to handle at our church, and we can deal with that at our retreats. All right, we go back here. All right. Another thing I would strongly recommend, if you don't do this in your regular elder meetings in particular, is to include a discussion on the agenda every year about elder succession. And what I mean by that is, who's our next elders? Because it's very likely that 5 years from now, your current group of elders will not be the same set. That either by retirement or someone moving away because of their job, or they retire and move away, or someone is unable to continue to be an elder, or someone passes away, unfortunately, that it's very likely that your elders 5 years will not be the guys in the room today. And so I think you got to be asking every year, who's our next couple of elders, and how are we going to get them ready so that they're not just coming in going, well, I'm not exactly sure what it means to be an elder, but I guess I'll be one if you want me to. And so you got to think about succession, and I think that's talked about. And so I've talked about this before in another webinar, but one simple way to do this is to use the metaphor of baseball and the Major League Baseball, that you start off in single A and then work up to double A and triple A, and you're finally in the major leagues. And so you've got a Google document that you have every year, that someone's got this document, and at your elderly retreat you put that up on the screen. If you got some kind of screen or television, that you could put that up there. And major leagues would be like being in the elders, that these are the people that are in the game. And then AAA, if you know AAA baseball, which we don't have AAA baseball around us anymore. We used to with the Richmond Braves, and then it became double. Now it's double A. But AAA baseball is those guys that could be major leagues in a heartbeat. You know, if your shortstop gets injured, you call up a guy from AAA because he's ready to go. And there are guys in your church that are not on your eldership, but if there were an injury or some reason to call them up, that they would be ready to go. So do you have a list of guys that if you needed to install an elder tomorrow, who would those guys be? And then to be thinking, there's a reason they're in AAA typically. If there's one skill set that's not quite at the level that they need to be, whether it's fielding or batting or base running or whatever it is. And so what's the way that you could help develop that person so that when they get called up, they're fully ready to hit the ground running? And so who's your AAA list? So you got that list on your spreadsheet, and then you got AA. In AA baseball, there's a lot of talent there, but they're younger typically, and they've still got some skill development to go. And so you know they're going to be in the major league someday, but they're coming along. And so you make that list. Is in our church today, who is this? And you know, during COVID, a lot of churches have really turned over who's here now versus who was here 2 years ago. And so re-looking at who's at our church and who would be AAA and AA is probably very important now more than ever. But it's those guys that you could envision them being a major leaguer. Like every AA player, if you go to one of those games, you can probably envision them in the major leagues, whether they ever get there or not, even if they've got a long way to go. And then single A, if you've ever gone to single A baseball, it's kind of a whole different class of baseball. It's guys that some of them might make it to the major leagues. And so you got that with skill development and experience, that they might make it. And so this is a list of a whole another group of guys in your church that of the group, if you can list 10 or 12 guys, maybe one or two of them might become elders someday. And so you put them on a column of a spreadsheet, AAA, AA, single A, and you pull that up every year. But the trick is not to have the list; it's to have a plan on how you're going to move guys from one level to the other. What are you going to do to get a single A guy to a double A? To AA, and what are you going to get your AA list to AAA, to where they're ready to go whenever needed? And then of course you know who your major leagues are. It's the guys that are in the room currently in the game. They're at your retreat. But I like to assign, for example, your current major leaguers, your current elders, to be a mentor to one that's either a AAA or a AA, and to have some objectives of talking to them about being elders, inviting those guys to join elder meetings occasionally as non-voting members, because they can see what your elder meetings look like. You might even invite them to come to your elder retreat, and there might be parts of it that they would need to go into their own breakout for, to where you can deal with elder only kind of things, but for them to be a part of that and see that there's a pathway towards that. But I think it's really important that you talk about succession. I've had so many elders that I've been sitting in their office, or not elders, but preachers sitting in their office, and they'll tell me about their elder situation currently is not where they would like it to be because they lost an elder for one reason or another, or two. Maybe it's a rotation that's prescribed because of your bylaws, that you're on for 3 years and off for a year or whatever. And their current set of elders is not what they want because they didn't plan ahead enough to have good elders to replace whatever was being lost. And so for a whole season, the church just is not running well. It's kind of the engine is not in tune. It's chugging along, missing on a cylinder, because there wasn't the preventative maintenance done on the front end to talk about succession, who's come along and who can we drop in when needed. And so that would be one of the important things that I would talk about. We'll go along. I apologize. My phone just pinged. Do not disturb. Sorry about that. All right, we're going to move along here. We're nearly done. All right, another thing I'd say is consider inviting a sister church to join you. And this is something I've only seen happen one time, but I thought it was great, is to have elderships go on a retreat together. And whether it's two churches, maybe three, it fills the room a little bit better. You get to make relationships with other elders, and you get to figure out, oh, they do things a little bit differently than we do, but that works for them, or that wouldn't work for us. And you can break out into breakout sessions, but your meal time, or if there's teaching about theology or some of that could be in larger groups. And I think it's just healthy, from the very beginning of our movement of churches that started here in our region in the late 1700s, early 1800s to begin with. It was about churches doing stuff together. If you think about that unity of all of our churches, at the old Cane Ridge revival, it was the preachers figuring out what we're going to preach together this morning, that we're going to all preach tonight. And I think there's just so much power when the churches do stuff together. And as independent Christian churches, we're not very good at that. And so this is an opportunity to model that by elders coming together and talk about that even at your church, that we're doing this with our other churches, and some really healthy relationships will start. And I think some really good learning will happen as iron sharpens iron from one church to the next. And so that's something that you consider. It'd have to be someone else that it's 2-hour drive away, but they could be 4 hours from you and you both come 2 hours in one direction. When I have seen it done, it's often because the preachers know each other and they know that the context of the churches and the elders are close enough that it wouldn't be such a disconnect that it wouldn't work, but that our churches are relatively similar in the way we do things. And so you can figure out who you might invite, but I think it'd be something to consider, that I think you might really be surprised at how much life and energy it would drop into your elder retreat by, rather than having 5 or 6 guys, to have 12 or 15 or 20 guys at your retreat, depending on the facility that you choose that you would do that with. All right. So let's see here. The last thing that I'll say here, and then we'll look for questions and kind of wrap up, is this is a point of emphasis for Waypoint, not only last year, but this year. Each year our staff has a retreat. We have our own retreat for 3 days. So it's 3 days, 2 nights. We get away and we do some of these similar things. We celebrate all that's happened with Waypoint in the last year. We talk about where we're at now and where we're headed. But our point of emphasis for this year, the one thing that we're going to focus on with everything that we do, is again this year leader care, which we identified last year in the midst of COVID. And this year it's leader care with a forward focus, that to not be about present, that this ministry season is really crummy. But yeah, we're all worn out, but we've got to get back on mission as churches, doing what the church was designed to do in spite of how crummy the last 2 years have been. But we really want to equip churches to take the lead on pastoring their own pastors. Typically church pastors, and particularly pastors' wives and families, do not see churches in general and elderships in specific to be the ones that are giving them care. And we need to fix that. That historically, our group of churches there's been some kind of sense of animosity often between the preacher and the elders, or the pastoral families and the elders. But you got to ask the question, who is pastoring your pastor? He and his family, they're giving their lives to your church, to shepherding your flock and working with you to do that. But who's pastoring them? And I believe it's the elder's role, as much as anyone else, to not only as elders to shepherd the flock, but to shepherd your pastor and his family. And so I would love there to be a conversation in every elders meeting to ask, how are we doing taking care of our pastor and his family? Does his wife love going to our church? Does his wife love how much she's supported and her family are cared for at our church? And I can tell you from the back end of this that when preachers move and look for other churches, often it's because, and they would never ever say this, but I can tell you that if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. You know how that goes. And so it's easy to look around for other churches when the pastor's family, the preacher's family, does not feel like they're being well loved and well cared for. if ministry, people don't in church don't understand when preachers say that ministry is a lonely business. And sometimes elders don't get that either. And but the reverse of that is true. Is if the preacher's wife feels loved and cared for, and their kids are accepted and loved and cared for, they never want to leave. They say, we love it here. And greener pastures are not greener when the family is being cared for at your church. And so I think there should be an element in every elders meeting to retune, to look at and be honest about how well are we pastoring our preacher? Are we making sure that he's taking his days off, that he's got some kind of restorative rhythm in his life, that he's being poured into as he's pouring his life out to the church? Are you giving him enough vacation? Are you blessing him with extra days of vacation after difficult ministry seasons? That you say, hey, we know you got 3 weeks of vacation, but we want you and your wife to take 3 days next month on us. Whatever it takes to pastor your pastor, not just with vacation days, but with things that restore him in such a way that he has the wind in his sails to keep moving forward as one of the leaders of your church. That's huge. And so that should be on the agenda. If you're taking notes about all the things that we could put on the agenda for our retreat, that's kind of a stray one. It doesn't have to be on there, but as part of our value at Waypoint, that leaders should be cared for, that would be something that we would hope that your elders would do as well. So that's the list that I made of things that I've seen from many churches, whether the ones that I've been a part of, both as an elder and as a minister, and both that churches can do in a healthy way, and that we've seen other churches lead as well by example. Those are some things that you could do. Let me tell you very quickly about a couple other things that are coming up at Waypoint. We talked about that we have other equipping webinars, and we've got a great one coming up. Phil Murdoch from one of our church plants, Life Point in Toano, but is also the fire chief there in his region, and trained, and he does training for safety and security. He's going to talk about the art of de-escalation with safety and security teams. And it's going to be a great conversation about how you do preventative measures so that if someone wants to disrupt what's going on at your church, you can catch that before it happens, that you de-escalate the scenario. So that's good training that's coming up 1 month from now on March 7th. The biggest thing that's on our calendar coming up for Waypoint is our Art of the Sermon series that we do every year in March. And that has grown each year of the last 4 or 5 years. And now we're going to be in 5 places in March, beginning with Mark Moore, the 14th, 15th, and 16th of March in Abingdon, Burlington, and Richmond. And then we will have Brett Andrews from New Life Church in Northern Virginia on March 17th in Martinsburg, West Virginia, which is there, the Panhandle right next to Winchester. And then Bob Russell is going to be in Somerville, South Carolina, in the south part of South Carolina as well the following week on Tuesday. So 5 venues in 7 days. And so we hope that you would come to that and bring others with you, send your preacher to it, make sure he's going to sharpen his skills about the art of the sermon. And so finally, let me double check to see, are there any questions? I'd love for you to chime in with any questions. I'm looking in the queue, don't see any to answer immediately. I also want to invite you to check out, if you haven't already, to check out the Waypoint webinar, that the podcast that started 1 year ago. It comes out every other week. You can subscribe to that on any of the typical podcast places. I use Spotify, but it's on 7 or 8 platforms. And leaders in the Waypoint region talk about their experience and successes and challenges in leadership. And there's something to learn every time from that. So if you're driving to work or going on vacation and want to hear some great stories of leaders in our region, the Waypoint podcast that's led by Dyke McCord and Becca Hott on the Waypoint staff. It's great stuff. We had more than 2,500 downloads of our podcast last year alone. So it's really good stuff. And so we invite you to do that. There's also a podcast specifically that you can subscribe to on the Waypoint website for preachers' wives, for ministry wives. And that just started in September, and it's doing really well, gaining traction as well as more and more people hear about it. So we're, as always, thankful for Mid-Atlantic Christian University, our ministry partner. And in the region, they love the church just as much as we do, and they partner with us in so many different ways. We're thankful for them. Thanks for joining us on our webinar tonight. And I hope to hear good news. I would love for you to contact us after your next elder retreat, and that some of these principles might have been embedded or installed into your retreat, and it's made a difference in tuning up your elders to run smoothly and efficiently for the next ministry season. So that's what we'll be praying for, and I'd love to hear from you on how that happens. Have a good night.